Good evening, students. Good evening to all of you. Ishwarya, very good evening. Students, now then, today would be an important lecture, students, on the supply particular part because today onwards you will find lot of nuances that we are going to pick up so far as this topic is concerned. Now, again, I'm repeating this particular point. Those students who are actually watching this lecture time, students, the practice batch which is in English, Hindi practice batch, we do it in the morning at 7:30. Those who want to take the benefit, be it CA final students or CMA final students, they can connect to WhatsApp in the number which has been given in the description. So therefore, you will be added to a dedicated channel so that you can get the link of the lectures as well as the PDF note. Abhin, Kavita, Tulsi, Ashwara, good evening to all of you. Now, students, going taking the discussion further. As I told you, students, it would be an important one now. So I have already have laid up the roadmap of our discussion completely, Krishna, in the yesterday's class also. In the yesterday's class also, students, the roadmap was being set up completely on this. So when we talk about 7.1a, the discussion that we had about 7.1a, the supplier who is a business entity. Why I'm saying the supplier is a business entity? What is the reason, students? In 7.1a of the scope of supply, I mentioned that the supplier is a business entity. Question therefore to all of you is, why did I mention the supplier to be a business entity? We all know that if a supplier is is undertaking a supply in the course or furtherance of business, then that makes a supplier a business entity. Is that clear to all of you, students? Now, that supplier has supplied what? Goods or service? This is what now we are going to look into it. And that supply is either made or it has agreed to be made, for which we have seen yesterday the consequence of that advance payment. To whom it has made the supply? To the recipient. Recipient has given what to the supplier? A consideration. And that creates a loop for 7.1a. That is what creates the loop for 7.1a, students, and that is what we were. That is where we were, students, in this regard. I hope that all of you are clear with this one now. Every one of you. So therefore, students, in this context, this is how the things primarily are there in this context, and whatever are the related points we have discussed in the yesterday's class. Now, students, our focus in this now remains on the two things. See the definition part, Tulsi, which we have to look into it. Some of the definition, just a second. I have to take this. Just a second. Just a second. So now students, in this particular context, as I told you that there are certain definitions, students, that we will have to pursue carefully in this regard. So the definition needs to be pursued, students, and one of the most important definition that we are going to hit upon today is on the goods and services as well as the consideration. In fact, students, you will find the study material questions are based on these definitions, which we have seen. You will also see primarily those that the questions which are being set are on the definitions as well. And some very typical things are there in that. And students fail to report in their answers that it is on that particular definition that this reason needs to be put up in their answers. So the reasons that you need to put up in your answer is based on the definitions. So let's look upon to this some very important observation. First of all, students, the definition of goods, and it is going to change the entire course of the meaning of the same. So if you see the definition of the goods which are being there, it means and it includes. So in this context, students, definition of goods, it means something and it includes something. This is what it is in this regard. Good evening, Prasanna. So what it means, students, it means that every kind of movable property. So you also will take a note of it. But these are very tricky things. Unless you take a note, it doesn't get registered in your mind. That is something which you need to be very careful about it. So every kind of movable property. So this is all about the movable property, students. Every kind of movable property. Other than, they have excluded what, students? Other than money and security. Other than money and security. So money and security is out from the game. Money and securities are out from the game, students. In this context. Now, if you see over here, students, you will look into this fact. What it includes? It includes, students, actionable claim. Goods, students, includes the actionable claim. Goods includes what? Actionable claim. Now, you tell me, students, one thing. Yesterday, we have discussed, if you look into this particular part carefully, yesterday, students, we were discussing about the actionable claim. And in that discussion of the actionable claim, students, in schedule number 3, which is a case of non-supply, actionable claim activity which is of actionable claim that is not considered as a supply, but for the three things. But for the three things, students, which are the three things? I think all of you are aware of it, isn't it? So therefore, what is the final conclusion? So although goods includes actionable claim, but after reading, after schedule 3, what is supply would only be restricted to LBG. What is supply, students? That will be restricted to LBG. Supply will be restricted to LBG, students. Abhi, all of you agree to this one? This we have also captured in our discussion, in our discourse. So just be very careful about this particular aspect, that yes, the goods include actionable claim. That is one. However, since as per schedule 3, actionable claim except for LBG are not a supply, and that is the reason why you need to conclude accordingly. Whether the question is on LBG, then you will say it is a supply. If it is not on LBG, then in that case you will say it is not non-supply. It is a non-supply, even if it is a goods. So although it may be a goods, but it is a non-supply. So you need to write like that your answers. Although it is a goods, but it is a non-supply, as per schedule 3. But if it is LBG, then not only that it is goods, but also it is a supply. Why? Because it doesn't fall within the scope of schedule 3. Is that clear to all of you, students? Is that clear to all of you, students, in this case? So that is the point. The next particular part, students, was about the growing crops. It inclusion, growing crop and the grass or the trees, primarily, which are what? Which are agreed to be severed. Which are agreed to be severed. Agreed to be severed before the supply. Before the supply. So students, the agreement is of what? What is this? What is goods? The mango tree or the timber? What is the goods? The mango tree or it is a timber? What is the goods in this case? Is it the mango tree that we are talking about it, or it is a timber out of that mango tree? So obviously, students, in this context, as far as the definition is concerned, it is not the mango tree, the standing tree which is there, but it is a timber. If at all, students, there is a mango tree which is there, but the agreement provides that you cut the mango tree primarily, and that is what you supply thereafter, then it would be considered as goods. You cut the mango tree and then you supply to me, that would be considered as goods. But if the agreement is, no, I want this mango tree, so will that be considered to be a goods? And the answer is no. Will that be considered to be a goods? And the answer is no. So that is one thing that you should be very careful about it. Is that point clear to all of you? Everyone? And that is exactly the point. So students, this is what it is in this regard. One more thing, students, is this, that transaction in money and security is out from the race. Transaction in money and security is out for the race. So if a money is there or security is there, then it is not considered to be a goods. It is not considered to be a goods. If you remember, yesterday we did one important discussion, and that discussion, students, was in respect of the gift which is given to the employee. Who is giving the gift? The employer is giving the gift to the employee. Then you then you have said that up to rupees 50,000 of the gift, it is not a supply. More than 50,000 of the gift, more than 50,000 of the value of the gift, it is a supply. That is what we were discussing in schedule 3 also. One point came up about the employee giving services to the employer is not a supply. So therefore, in that point itself, we made this discussion. What if the employer is giving something to the employee, and that something, if it is a gift, then what exactly is the recourse available to us? If that something is a gift, then what is the recourse available to us? Then we have said that up to 50,000 of the gift amount that given by the employer is not considered as supply. Excess of 50,000 would be a supply. Okay. Now, I must tell you this, that the best particular thing that the employer should be doing is that they should be giving the employee the cash. What the employer should be doing? They should be giving the employee the cash or money, or they should be giving the employee the security. Because by giving the employee a security or by giving the employee the money, that will not be considered as a goods at first place. So therefore, by giving that amount of money or by giving that amount of security, what we will say, it is not a supply of goods. It is not a supply of goods. Because it is not a supply of goods, therefore in that context, it will not hit the supply chargeability. That is one thing that you should be very careful about it. So these are the tricks which the ICA might play, and you have to be very careful about these particular aspects. See the interlinking the way it is happening now. So nevertheless, coming back to this particular part, students. Now, what about the services, students? Very, very expansive definition. Very expansive definition of service. See the definition of service, how it goes. Service means, and service does not include. Oh, sorry, and service includes. It means and it includes. So what it means and what it includes? Let's see in this case. So it means anything other than what? Other than goods, money, and security. Other than goods, money, and security. So service means anything other than goods, money, and security. So good part is that money and security is neither a goods nor a service. Therefore, it is a case of a non-supply. In a way, can I say it is a non-supply of goods or non-supply of service? Because it is neither a goods nor a service at first place. Secondly, see the definition. Service means anything other than goods. So what about the immovable property then, students? Immovable property, tell me one thing now in this context. Is an immovable property, can that be considered as a service? immobile property, can they be considered as service? As far as the definition is concerned, yes. Because what they have said that whatever is not a goods is a service. Whatever is not a goods is a service. So therefore, if we talk about an immobile property, definitely it is a service. But now again, if we refer to Schedule 3, which talks about non-supply, which talks about what? Non-supply. So in the non-supply, we have seen that one of the entry was for for the transfer of land or building. In the building, there was one exception that we have seen. In the building, that CC, consideration received before CC or after CC, that thing we have considered. So if there is a transfer of land and building, then it is not non-supply. But is it a service? Yes, it is a service, but a non-supply of service. But what about a letting out of an immobile property? What about a letting out of an immobile property? Is it a case of a service? Yes, it is a case of a service. Is it provided in schedule number 3? No, it is not provided in schedule number 3, because schedule 3 talks about the sale of land or building. And therefore, a letting out of an immobile property is very much a service. Letting out of an immobile property is very much a service. Is that point clear to all of you students? Every one of you? So this is how the things has to be looked upon. So therefore, students, immobile property in this context, in this case, is a service. Is a service. But a sale of land or building is not a supply. Is not a supply of service as per schedule 3. So it may be a service, but it is not a supply of service. Are you getting the difference? It is a service, but it is not a supply of service. And because it is not a supply of service, therefore it is not subject to chargeability. It is not subject to chargeability. I hope that all of you are clear with this particular point. Now you are getting it, how you have to write your answers in context. How you have to develop your reasons in your answers in this regard. Now students, what about, say, a builder has a FSI? You would have heard this concept of an FSI in the real estate. He has an FSI or he has a TDR. So there are some terms which are used. Some rights are there. So if an FSI is sold or a TDR in respect of the immobile property is sold by the builder, if the FSI is sold or if the TDR in respect of that building is sold by the builder, or any tenancy right is sold in respect of that particular building, so whether that also will hit schedule number 3 to say that it is a sale of an immobile property? And the answer is no. It is only restricted to land and building, not to be extended towards the right which arises out of land and building. So therefore, that schedule 3 that we have discussed was only restricted to what? The sale of land and building, and not to be extended further towards what? The right arising out of land and building. Is that point clear to all of you? I'm telling you students one more time that you people would have read like sale of FSI, sale of TDR and all. You would have said, yes, that is taxable. GST is charged. Tell me the reason. That's where you'll get stuck. And you yourself will admit the fact that to develop the reason is the game. And this is exactly what we are doing it in this regard. The reason needs to be developed, students. So first focus what is excluded. It is a sale of land and building. That is it. Any right arising out of land and building, if that is what is sold, will that also fall within the scope of schedule 3? Answer is no. Answer is no, students. I hope that every one of you are clear with this one. So immobile property, students, it is a service, but a sale of land or building is not a supply of service as per schedule 3. Sale of FSI, just write this note, FSI or TDR, just write this one, is a supply Since is a supply. Since what is excluded from supply. See, this is how you have to develop the reason. Keep writing. Unless you write, you will not get these things registered in your mind. Keep reading it. As good as by tomorrow you will forget it. So sale of FSR or TDR is a supply, since what is excluded from supply is a sale of land or building. Is a sale of land or building only. However, you can write under Schedule 3. Under Schedule 3. However, transfer of any right arising out of land or building is not covered in Schedule 3, and hence it is a supply. Hence it is a. Is that clear to all of you, students? I did this extension, students, today of some lecture just to discuss some of these particular points, so that I will make you understand and I'll make you write also this. Have you all copied on this, students? And every one of you are clear with this particular point? Not only understanding, but also on writing part. Quickly, students. Ashwari. Tulsi. Perfect. Now, students, what does it include? Service includes what? See, money is out from both goods as well as service. Security is also out. Jyoti, good evening. Securities is also out from what? From the goods and services. So both money as well as the securities are out from goods and service. But the service includes what? Includes use of what? In this case, the money. In this context, its conversion by cash or by any other mode for which a separate consideration is charged. Separate consideration is charged. And the last one, students, is in this case facilitating the transaction in securities. Facilitating the transaction in security. That is what it is. Have you written this particular point, students? Now, so far as the use of money is concerned, students, you all are aware of it in this context. So, supposingly, I am giving you a loans and advances. The classic example is that of loans and advances. It allows you to use the money. And for allowing you to use the money, I am going to charge you an interest. For allowing you to use the money by giving you a loans and advances, I am also going to charge you processing fees for such loans and advances. So therefore, loans and advances is a classic example in this regard. And by virtue of this, there are certain items which comes into play. What is that consideration? So the consideration in this particular context is in the form of what? Is in the form of processing fees. processing fee, and the second one, students, is the interest. Is in the form of interest. Now, this processing fees which has been charged for allowing you to use the money, this processing fees is taxable. And so far as the interest is concerned, students, it is presently what? Presently exempt. Presently exempt. Is that point clear to all of you, students? Every one of you. Now, students, if you are making a note, just let me in fact tell you one thing. You all are maintained the notebook, all of you. So when you are making your notes, students, try to make the notes horizontally so that you get that width to stretch it up. Don't use the normal way of using your notebook, the way we write it. Try to use a horizontal landscape, turn it around, make it horizontal, and that's how you try to copy down this particular notes so that you can accommodate all these particular aspects in this content. Okay, not an issue, Jyoti, but do watch it. It's a very important discussion that we are having it presently. Okay, presently exempt. I hope that all of you are clear with this one. Now, this you all are aware what they're talking about it as far as this entry is concerned. Every one of you are aware of it. What this entry is concerned. This entry that you're talking about it, students, is nothing but this entry which they are talking about it is nothing but what? In this regard, forex conversion for which the consideration is charged. So everyone is aware of it. So I need not even explain it. Every one of you are aware that this is talking about the forex conversion. Now the next one, students, is the facilitating what? The transaction in security. So this is a case of a brokerage. This is a case of a brokerage, students. So here a broker is facilitating the transaction in security. So the main transaction of sale of security, on that transaction there is no GST because it is neither goods nor a service. But anyone who is facilitating a transaction in security, that consideration charge will be subject to GST because that is in the nature of a service and hence will be subject to supply of service, and accordingly charge of GST would be attracted. Charge of GST would be attracted. So a broker is facilitating the transaction in security. So the brokerage charged by him will be subject to GST, subject to exemption if any. We'll see that later on. Now, there is one important point which is covered, students, in your module also, is about the security lending service. Security lending, students. Security lending service. Security lending service, students. In this context, security lending service, students, is it a sale of security? Answer is no. In this context, so a security lending service, students, is not a sale of security, but is it facilitating in that context? So it is not a case of, students, it is not a case of a sale of security. It is a temporary, like just the way loans are given. Similarly, here also primarily the loan has been given of security. So can I say therefore it is nothing but facilitating a transaction in security? And the answer is yes. That security again is going to come back to me after the period is expired. So therefore, in this particular context of this one, students, a security lending service, same the way we discussed about the loans and advance for the money, same would be the reasoning that you are going to put up for a security lending service, that it is more like a facilitating a transaction. And the transaction could be anything. Here the transaction is of loan, facilitating a transaction in security, and therefore it is a service, and accordingly, primarily in this context, the GST would be attracted. I hope that all of you have cleared with this particular point, every one of you. And if you have taken the note of it, students, we will move forward now in this regard. Prasanna, Aishwarya. Perfect. If that is the case, students, I'm proceeding it further. That is the case, students, I'm proceeding it further. Perfect. Now, the next particular point, students, that we are supposed to discuss is in respect of. Is in respect of what? Is in respect of the consideration. It is about the consideration, students. So that definition, students, of consideration is also equally very important. Now, students, I am not deliberately giving you the definition. Everything is in section 2. So you can write for goods, service and consideration, section 2 of CGST Act. The clause number, primarily, it will be difficult even to remember it. Section 2 is all that we are covering it. The selected section over here. ITC, students, also has got very important definitions. So this topic and the topic on ITC, these two has got some very important definitions. And for these two topics, the definition needs to be known. Obviously, for other topics at least also, but this kind of an analysis is not required for any other topic. But for this topic and the next topic is ITC, for which the typical definition needs to be known. Other than that, yes, you need to observe it and move on. But to remember it, this is what, students, you have to be very, very careful about it. I hope that all of you are clear with this one. Now, so far as the consideration is concerned, so far as the consideration, students, is concerned, in this context, consideration herein, it includes something and it excludes something. Include and exclude. Sir, what it includes and what it excludes? So it includes, students, every, like you know about it, monetary consideration. M is monetary and M is non-monetary. Then there is act. And there is one more thing, forbearance to act. That is what the consideration is all about. That is what the consideration is all about. Fine, students. Now, you'll say, sir, how do you say that act is a consideration? Like, for example, I give you a simple example. I am supplying a goods to you. You are saying that, sir, I don't have a money. Okay, but I can do this work for you. So in that case, you are giving an act. So is that a consideration which I've received from you? The answer is yes. Forbearance to act, also you all are aware that not to do something primarily is also a consideration. That is what this particular point is all about. We have seen about the fact about the non-competent cases. There is a forbearance to act. Be careful. Huh? But if in this context, if you remember, students, that employee primarily was giving a service to the employer. And what was a service to that employer? Was forbearance to act. What is that forbearance to act? That I'm not going to join the competitor's job. I'm not going to take the competitor's job. So therefore, that employee is providing a service to the employer. Now, was it in the course of his employment? Was it in the course of his employment? Answer is no. And because it was not in the course of his employment, therefore, what we have discussed and concluded in that regard, because it was not in the course of his employment, therefore, it was not coming in that schedule number 3. And because it is not coming in schedule number 3, therefore, it is a supply. Supply for a consideration. Answer is yes. Why for a consideration? Forbearance to act is also a consideration, and therefore it will fall within the ambit of 7(1)(a). It will fall within the ambit of 7(1)(a). Is that point clear to all of you students? Every one of you. That's exactly how you're supposed to do it. That's exactly how you're supposed to give the reasons. But obviously, this is a greater height of developing the reason, which you will develop it step by step by keeping writing, taking a notes to that effect. And it excludes what, students? It excludes in this case it excludes, students, what? Government. And which government? Indian government. Government of India subsidy. Indian government subsidy. Now this government can be both. When I say Indian, so therefore both central as well as state government. But Indian, a foreign government giving you a subsidy, that will not be excluded. Okay, and further what you have to write? Provided if directly linked to the price of supply. If directly linked to the price of supply. Is that point clear to all of you, students? We will give the reason for it, students. In this context, some important example also I'll just share with all of you. But before I get into the example mode, just a last particular point on consideration. So therefore, this is the definition of consideration. So we will discuss some 3-4 typical cases on consideration, and couple of the typical cases are covered in your study material question bank, which is also there in your notes. So we'll be discussing that. But before I discuss that particular point, I just need to therefore say this consideration, students, we are talking about it in this context. Consideration received by whom? A supplier. Consideration received by whom? By a supplier. Who is that supplier? He is a business entity. Why he is a business entity? Because the supply that he is doing is in the course of the business. Therefore, he is a business entity. Now, in that, therefore, what I can say that consideration family for a business entity. Now, if he takes a consideration, a business entity takes a consideration, that is point number one. And if you do not take the consideration, do not take the considerations. But point of commonality is that it is a business entity. What is the point of commonality? It is a business entity taking the consideration and do not take the consideration. Then what happens? So business entity taking a consideration versus not taking a consideration. So 7(1)(a) will be attracted, a business entity taking the consideration and versus not taking a consideration. And if it doesn't take a consideration, then what happens? Then in that case, students, only four transaction will fall within the scope of supply. All of you agree to this one? Only 4 transactions will fall within the scope of supply. Only 4 transactions, students, will fall within the scope of supply, which is given to you where? Under section 7(1)(c), read with schedule 1 in this context. But I have ensured to give you writing that this discussion is for a business entity. Why? I'm emphasizing on business entity because sometimes we forget in that schedule number 1, in that 7(1)(c) or 7(1)(b), for that matter, what was there? Was it in the course of business or not? That paragraph we forget it. We remember schedule number 1, but we start forgetting what, students? We start forgetting on this particular important aspect. And what is that? You all are aware. That therefore I made you write that business entity, if he is taking a consideration. What is business entity? An entity or a supplier who is making a supply in the course of his business. And if he is taking a consideration, then 7(1)(a) is applicable. If he is not taking a consideration, then 7(1)(c) read with schedule number 1 is what is applicable. I hope that all of you are clear with this one now. Every one of you. That exactly is the point, students. This is how the things has to be looked upon. This is how, students, it has to be looked upon. So now, students, with this particular proposition now, if we have to take it further, the discussion, let's now take across, students, some of the examples. I will target, students, first the subsidies part, the subsidy which we have discussed over here. Let me give you an example, students, quickly. Like, for example, in that COVID and all, the COVID vaccination, say the price was, say, 1,000 rupees per vaccination. The government said that nothing done. We have to do the vaccination pan India. And if you put 1,000 rupees, how people are going to afford it? But he says that this is my cost, what I can do. So to that, what he explained was that fine, do one thing. 700 is a subsidy which I'm going to give you per transaction. So that you put a price of 300 only in the market. Now, who is giving the subsidy? That is important. Who is giving the subsidy? It is given by Government of India. And that subsidy is directly linked with the price of supply? Yes. That subsidy is directly linked with the price of supply? Yes. So in that particular case, students, what do we say? What would be the consideration now for the purpose of GST? Consideration would be 300. Consideration would be 300. So that will be excluded from the definition of consideration. So it is not a consideration. This is what you are supposed to write your reason. This is not a consideration. And that is the reason why the value would be only restricted to rupees 300. This is not a consideration and therefore not a supply. Not a consideration, therefore not a supply. And hence not chargeable. So that is kept. Please understand, these people could have tried to understand the meaning of it. These people could have made this exclusion in the valuation topic also. But they have made this exclusion in the definition itself. By making the exclusion in the definition itself, what they have achieved? They have ensured that it will remain outside the scope of supply of 7-1A. Because then supply under 7-1A means for consideration. Consideration in my example is only now 300. So it is now out. That balance 700 is outside the scope of supply of 7-1A and therefore outside the charge itself. The way we discussed about the alcoholic liquor for human consumption, not chargeable. Why? Outside the charge. Because it is put up where? In the 366(12)A. Therefore outside the charge. Here also they did the same thing. Instead of putting it in the chapter valuation section 15, 15 comes after the charge. Because when you do the valuation is of the supply. So therefore it comes after the charge. And in that they could have given that subsidy which is directly linked with the supply given by government, Indian government, state or center would be outside the value. That they have not done. They have used it, the definition of consideration. So what I am trying to only convey to all of you is that you have to write it in this way. That it is outside the value. Don't write that. It is a wrong statement. What you have to write? That it is outside the consideration. If you write it is outside the valuation, it means that you are accepting that it is chargeable. But in the valuation, it is kept outside. This is a wrong sentence. Be careful on these things. Now let's continue with this example further. Continue this example further, students. Foreign government also wanted the vaccination. So foreign government said to this Indian company that we will also give you 700 rupees. We will also give you 700 rupees as a subsidy. Now you tell me. Foreign government is also giving to this Indian company 700 rupees subsidy. Will it be out? Will it be out of the consideration? Now, what is the consideration for the purpose of supply under 7-1A? What is the consideration for the purpose of supply under 7-1A? It is 1,000 rupees. It is 1,000 rupees. We all agree to this one. It is 1,000 rupees. Why? Indian government giving this state or center, giving this subsidy directly linked with the price. That is what is excluded. Tata Memorial Trust. What Tata Memorial Trust has said that no. Indian company, you are giving vaccination, but government is giving you, Indian government is giving you 700. But we still feel that it should come in the market at 100 rupees. Because 300 is still very high. So Tata Memorial Trust, they are telling to the Indian company that we will give you 200 rupees subsidy. Now you tell me what is the consideration to be taken for the purpose of supply under 7-1A. Mark my question very carefully. What is the consideration to be taken for the purpose of supply under section 71A in my Tata example? Quickly, I need an answer from all of you. What is the consideration to be taken for the purpose of supply under section 71A? Aishwarya, Rishi, Prasanna. Quickly. Tulasi. Indeed, it would be 300. Consideration in this particular case will still be 300, because what is not a consideration is subsidy given by the center or the state government if it is directly related to the price of supply. Is that point clear to all of you? Is that point clear to all of you? Fine, students. That exactly the point. That is exactly the point, students. I hope that every one of you are now clear with this one. All of you. Kavita, Aveen, Tulsi, can you proceed now further? Perfect. Now let's take the things further, students. Now I'll give you some easy examples. Deposit, students. There are two types of deposit that we all know. Be careful. Huh? There are two types of deposit, students, that we all know. What are the two types of deposit? One is known as security deposit, and another, students, is known as what? Deposit in the nature of advance for supply. In the nature of advance for supply. So, students, in this particular context, if it is a security deposit, which means it has to be returned, so it is not a consideration in this context. And what about a deposit, students, in the nature of advance for supply? Is it a consideration? And the answer is yes. And I gave you the case study of advance yesterday itself. What happens for the services we have discussed, receipt, vouchers and all, and accordingly the charge of GST is subtracted. That discussion we already had it yesterday. Coming to the next particular question, students, over here. So this is for deposit in this regard. The next particular point, students, in this regard is what? Is about the grants. Is about the grant, students. So the grants, when we talk about it in this context, when we talk about it, students, see, what is the grant technically speaking? A grant has been given. Generally, students, the grants are being given. They are generally like some of the grants has been given for doing something in this context. Generally, there is no such particular direct benefit or something which in return which is given. So this is just a grant to do something. You do it. We don't expect primarily that you should give us something on return. So grant technically generally is not a consideration. Generally, you can say not a consideration. Just like subsidy. Just like subsidy, it will not be a consideration in this regard. Now, the most same way, students, if you talk about donations, this is an important one, students. Donation. Now, ask the question in the donation. You have to ask one question. Is there any direct benefit? Is there any direct benefit given to the donor? Given to whom? To the donor. Which means that, students, is there any quid pro? A Latin word, students, is quid pro. Quid pro. If you say that, yes, sir, there is a direct benefit that if I give you a donation, then they will give me this. In that context. And accordingly, that then would be then the donation would be given as a consideration. The donation then will be considered a consideration. So that is a consideration. But if you say otherwise in this context, that no, there is no direct benefit received by the donor in this context. So therefore, in that case, it is not a consideration. This is a criteria. Is there any direct benefit? This is the criteria. This is the question to be asked. You say, sir, but sir, any particular donor who is giving a donation, his name is put up in the trust. His name is put up in the trust office that he is a donor. What is the question that I have asked you? Is there a direct benefit having an impact on the supply? And the answer is no. This is just for a goodwill that this person has done a charity. This is just to register the fact that this person has given the charity. Is there any direct benefit that I am receiving for my supply? Answer is no. And therefore, such donation given primarily doesn't have any direct benefit towards my supply, and hence it is not in the nature of consideration. I hope that every one of you are clear with this one. Every one of you. And if every one of you are clear with this one, students, now comes one important particular discussion, which is captured in your study material also. Students, please pay attention now, every one of you. You may be aware, students, that like Reliance, ONGC, they are doing the exploration activity of the oil, natural reserves. And after the exploration of the oil and all, primarily what happens is that there is a production sharing contract wherein some portion would be given to the government and maximum would be retained by whom? By the Reliance. Now the question therefore to all of you is that in this context, that the oil which is explored, what is retained by Reliance? Is it a consideration for Reliance? The oil which is explored, which is retained by Reliance, is it a consideration in this context? And the answer is no. What is the reason that you will give? TBIC has given two reasons why it is not a consideration. Point number one. First of all, it is why they are retaining it primarily. It is just like compensating to the cost of exploration. But it's such a costly affair, isn't it? Otherwise, every third person would have entered into the exploration business. Why only few, two or three players are in the exploration business? Because it is such a costly affair. So therefore, that exploration activity is such a costly affair that as per the agreement, that whatever is oil which is explored, that is retained by the explorer to compensate for his cost. To compensate for his cost. That is point number one. Point number two, which has been there over here, is the fact that can I be said that this oil which is retained by me, it is what? Is it that supply I have given it to me? It is like a consideration given I have done this activity, I found this and I received this. I have done this activity, I found it and I received it. Is it a consideration? And the answer is no. You cannot receive the consideration from your own self. So I did the activity of exploration. I found and I received. I came, I saw, I conquered. Isn't it? So I conquered. Is it a consideration? Answer is no. Rami. Therefore, in that context, it is not something which can be considered to be a consideration. Is that point clear to all of you? Don't write this reason. I came, I saw, I conquered. This is not the reason. This is what Alexander has said in a Latin term. Vini, vici, vini, vidi, vici. Vini, vidi, vici. Came, I saw, I conquered. That is what you people have to say after your examination. And when the results comes out and you are successful, the one sentence that you're going to say would be, I came, I saw, and I conquered. That is the ultimate thing that you people will be saying on the day of your result. The moment you see yourself as successful, I came, I saw, I conquered. Fine, students. So please take a note of it in this context. Oil explorer. Just take a note of it, students. oil explorer and producer, and or you may write oil explorer received petroleum, petroleum on account of PSC. What is PSC? Production sharing contract. PSC is production sharing contract. Is it taxable? Is it taxable? What is the answer in this case? What is the answer? Not taxable. And what is the reason in this regard? In this regard, students. See, it is, I'm telling you one thing, students. After hearing na, and you would have heard it, it's very easy to move further. But if I don't make you right, it is as good as gone. All the hard work would be gone. It will fizzle out by the next day. So I understand the fact that yes, family, in fact, on the contrary, I'm breaking my flow by making you write this particular thing. But I understand deep inside that if you don't write it, you won't manage it. That I understand. After having a 19 years of experience, I know where you will falter on the day of the examination. So to an extent, I am in fact breaking my own flow. And if I don't do this, that will not justify for what I know where you people are going to go wrong primarily further next month or the day of the exam. That's the reason why I am making you right. Please do right. So this is what is the why, what is the reason, students? Compensation towards the cost of exploration. It is a compensation towards the cost of exploration. And what is the second one? It is not a consideration. It is not a consideration for supply to government as the exploration was for themselves and not as a service to the government. Is that point clear to all of you? Not as a service to the government. Fine, students. 7-1A is complete now. We'll move further. Have you all copied on this, students? This 7-1 is complete. Now, if you go back to this chart, which we have discussed already, now, students, 7-1B, there is one 7-1AA, which is for that supply to the members of the association. Supply to the members of association, that we'll do it separately. It's a completely distinct point. 7-1B is for the import of service. 7-1C is what I'm going to target now. And then I will target 7-1B. So first let me target 7-1C and then I'll target 7-1B. 7-1C, all of you are aware, identifies the 4 cases. Students, 7-1C identifies the 4 cases. Already without looking into it, you know what is the 7-1C? That Aishwarya profit portion would be when he supplies it. When the Reliance is going, what the Reliance will do? He gets the exploration. That is the crude petroleum. That crude petroleum he is going to put up where? In the refinery. Once from the refinery, the crude petroleum would become a petroleum product, and thereafter it is going to supply it. So the supply will, and then he is going to earn profit. So what you are asking a question is that last stage when actually it is going to supply to third party, from where he is going to make a profit. At this stage, the stage that we are talking about is about the exploration, and he found something and he is sharing it. So that activity that he did it for himself and not for the government. And that is the reason why, students, this is what it is in this context. Profit is not exempt. There is no such profit. That profit will come at the last stage. We are not talking about that transaction finally when he makes a petroleum product out of the refinery and when he supplies to third party. That transaction, I'm not talking about it. I am talking about a transaction where he is exploring and retaining some part, and some part he is giving to the government. Was this activity he did it for third party to the government, or was he doing it for himself? He was doing it for himself. He was doing it for himself. Fine, students. That exactly the point. That exactly the point, students. So now, students, coming back to this particular part, 7.1c, for which we have to refer schedule number 1. Again, I think by now you have already by-hearted this part. Which part, students? The business entity. The part relating to business entity. That, first of all, a business entity which doesn't take any consideration. What does business entity means? The supplier is doing the course of his business but not taking a consideration. In that case, it would be a supply under 7.1c, and read with schedule 1, only 4 cases are identified which can be considered as a supply. Only 4 cases. Now, which are those 4 cases is what we need to highlight upon in this regard. Therefore, in this context, students, if you see over here, so 7.1c in this context plus schedule number 1 herein. So what exactly it is? Activities without consideration. Activities without consideration. Plus, students, this is important. In the course of business. And in all, we know how many cases? 4 cases. Now, students, you will make it systematically this particular chart, because the impact would be felt at various places. So I'm keeping this side open over here. Just keep this place blank and identifying 4 places. First, students, you know, permanent transfer of asset, of business asset, permanent transfer of business asset on which ITC was availed, The second part, students, is a related party transaction. Second part was a related party transaction. The third part, students, is about principal and agent. Third part is about the principal and agent. The fourth part, students, is about, here comes, the import of service. So import of service, students, is coming in 2 places. One is in 7.1b and another is in 7.1c. At 2 places, did you realize that import of service is coming in 2 places? 7.1b, which we are yet to touch, and then 7.1c, which we are doing it now. So what does it mean? It means that we need to distinguish under what cases import of service will fall under 7.1b and in what cases the import of service will fall under 7.1c. This aspect needs to be distinguished. This aspect, students, needs to be distinguished. Now, accordingly, we will distinguish it. Don't worry about it. But now then, please make a note of this in this regard. Over here, all of you. So first of all, is it for goods or services? These 4 cases, is it pertaining to goods and services? The first cases is only for goods. Related party transaction, students, is for both goods and services. This is also very confusing in this case. Some case only for goods, some case for both goods and service. Like in the case of income tax, PGBP, some provisions are there for only for business, some provisions are there only for profession, some provisions are there for both business and profession. So that distinction, at least in income tax, may not be required at final CA level. But this distinction is required whether it is for goods or it is for service or it is for both. At least at final CA level, you need to know for GST part. For income tax, only few provision require this sort of distinction. Principal and agent, students, goods. Import of service, the name itself concludes it is a service. It is for service. Now, the valuation, students, rules are applicable in all the cases because it is for related, it is not for consideration. Students, this is not for a consideration. And because it is not for consideration, 15(1) will not apply. Because it is not for consideration, 15(1) will not apply. And if 15(1) doesn't apply, because 15(1) is all about the consideration charge. So in that case, it will go under 15(4). And if it goes under 15(4), it will take you to the valuation rules. It will take you to the valuation rules. So which rules that has to be referred over here? I'm just putting it straight away. Rule 30 and 31. The residual category. Rule 28. Principal and agent. Rule 29. And therefore, here it is Rule 30 and 31. Now you'll say, sir, what is there in that? That I'm not taking it through. Otherwise, we'll divert. But at least this reference point needs to be known. What is there inside it in these rules? That we'll see in the valuation rules. At least for a related party transaction, rule number 28, all of you are aware, it is the open market value. For rule number 28, that much all of you are aware of it. So now, students, this is what it is. Today, students, my major emphasis for all of you would be on this two particular part. And through this two particular part, I will also conclude 7(1)(b), which is for import of service. For this, after this, we'll conclude it. And then once that is concluded, then we'll come to point number 1 and point number 3. Point number 1 and point number 3. That is the approach in which we will do it. So now let's look upon to this one, students. For the related party transaction in this regard, students. So I'm just taking the second one, the related party transaction. So in this context, just putting it in a proper perspective, students. Supply of goods or services between whom? Between the two entity. Which are those two things? One is a related person, and second is what? Distinct person, students. You see this? Distinct person also has been used. Distinct person also has been used. You'll say, sir, what is a distinct person? Let's try to crack it up one by one. These definitions are important, students. And in fact, in one of the case study, related person question was asked. Just like in the transfer pricing law, we have got associated enterprise definition. That definition was so important. In the same way, here for the GST law, the two definitions which are very important, one is that of related person, another is of the distinct person. In the income tax law, the definition which is most important is the associated enterprise transaction. Who is a AE? Section 92A. Section 92A, which defines the term associated enterprise. So coming to this particular part of distinct person, there are two categories of distinct person which has been specified. Two categories of distinct person, students, which has been categorized. And what is the two categories, students? The first one, if you see, is about the establishment in different state. Establishment in different state. So automatically, if you have an establishment in one state, another in the other state, or union territory, as the case may be, so they will be deemed to be a distinct person. What about the same state? If it is in the same state, then in the same state also they could be considered as a distinct person, provided Provided what? Now filling the blanks. I need to know the answer. Provided in the same state also these establishment of the same person would be deemed to be a distinct person. Provided indeed separate registration student. So establishment in the same state, but registered separately. So this is generally a voluntary registration, students. This is generally a voluntary registration. Yes, Rishi. So therefore, registered separately. Okay. Now, one of the question of the ICI, in that one adjustment was given. I'll put it over there. In one of the question of the ICI, one adjustment was given. And in that adjustment, they've said that that person was in Karnataka, and from Karnataka, say for example, from Bangalore, he is taking the goods to his another factory in Dharwad. The person who was a registered person in Karnataka, so from Bangalore, he is taking what? Taking the goods to his another factory in Dharwad, and both the Bangalore office and the Dharwad office, they were not separately registered. So he had only one registration. Now, what are you going to say about it? In that context, this was one of the adjustment of the ICI question. So what are you going to say? If not separately registered, in this case, if not separately registered students, then what does it imply? This is what they do. Problem is that, students, you know what? We stop over here in our analysis. ICI extend from here and give you an opposite sentence. And then we need to think what to write. And that's the reason why we need to develop the reasons. So if not separately registered, then it is what? It is simply what? Taking out the goods from one place and putting it in another place. This is what you write. Please don't use the word stock transfer. This is dangerous thing that you're writing it. Don't use the word stock transfer. Primarily, the stock transfer can also happen interstate. Don't use this one particular sentence. Stock transfer, supposingly, in that particular context, the stock transfer is a very dangerous particular term, students. It has got a multifaceted layers which is there. So don't use this particular term stock transfer loosely. On the contrary, in this context, the branch Aishwarya, that's a problem. No? So here this is a problem. You will say stock transfer between the branch. But that's what it is. When I say the branch is in two different places, then it's deemed to be a distinct person. That is how we can extend it. Deemed to be a distinct person. So the way ICI is reasoned out is the correct reason. See how the reason that they have developed. They have ensured that they are not walking in those tricky areas of stock transfer or from one branch to another branch. What if they are in a different state? Family. That is how these languages are so critical. And that is the reason why ICI, while giving the reason, they have said what? Is simply taking out the goods from one place and putting it in another in the same state. In the same state with same registration number. both the stay, both the offices, both the premises, do they have the same registration number? Answer is yes. So taking the goods from one place and putting it into another in the same state with the same registration number. So therefore, the highlighting here has to be, in this case, in the same state with the same registration number. Please use the highlighters also. I hope that you are sitting in the class with the highlighters as well. This is what you need to write. So if you want to write, say, branch transfer, stock transfer, but please do supplement with this sentence: in the same state with the same registration. And hence, therefore, is it a supply? Therefore, it is not a supply. Because then it is not a supply between a distinct person. And because it is not a supply to another person, there is no recipient. There is not a supply because there is no recipient of supply. There is no recipient of supply. Why it is not a supply? Because supply to materialize needs to have a recipient. Does this particular case has it recipient? Does this particular case has a recipient? And the answer is no. It doesn't have a recipient. And that is the reason why this is the reason. Can I ask you one more question, students, over here? And that is what the ICI does in CA panel. Tell me then, whether in this particular transaction tax invoice will the tax invoice would be given? In this particular supply, whether the tax invoice will that be given or not? I'm talking about this one, students. For this transaction, is tax invoice, will that be given? In this case, tax invoice, students. Answer is no. Tax invoice, students, will not be required. What about delivery challan, students? But delivery challan, will that be required? Whether a delivery challan, will that be required or not? And the answer is, why delivery challan is required? Because you know the importance of delivery challan. That regard. So delivery challan is required, but not a tax invoice. So tax invoice is required in those cases where there is a supply. Tell me one thing, whether tax invoice, will this be required? In this case, tax invoice, will this be required? Yes. Tell me over here, tax invoice, will this be required? And the answer is, is that point clear to all of you? Every one of you? My next question, therefore, to all of you over here is this. Students, because there is a turnover limit, like composition scheme and other things which are their turnover limit, and for that we have to determine the aggregate turnover. So when we do an aggregate turnover in that context, in this regard, tell me, let me put it in this way. So to undertake an aggregate turnover, so whether this supply, will it be a part of the aggregate turnover? Answer is yes. Will this supply be a part of the aggregate turnover? Answer is yes. Will this supply be a part of the aggregate turnover? Which one? Same state, different branch, but with the same registration. Same state with the same registration. Sorry. Same state with the same registration. Will it be a part of the aggregate turnover? Because it is not a supply. Turnover means what? Supply. I told you yesterday also, even that schedule 3 is not a supply. It is neither a supply of this nor a supply of that. And if it is neither a supply of this nor a supply of that, so therefore it will not be a part of your turnover. The same reason also happens to be over here also. It is not a supply. And if it is not a supply, then there is no question of it being considered as what? As a part of your turnover. Now let's have a look, students, to the related party definition. Now this definition is not technical, and in fact, those who would have studied associated enterprise under section 92A would easily appreciate what these definitions are. More or less, they are overlapping to what is there in 92A, but 92A is more exhaustive. There are more entries in 92A of your Income Tax Act as far as the definition of associated enterprise is concerned. Here it is a limited entry, but still you need to know. So therefore, the first case is that officer or director of one another company, of each other company, each other's company. One of the example I can give, X is a director of Y's company and Y is a director of X company. So both this entity becomes a related party. They are partners. Employer and employee. Now on employer and employee, students, I'll just put one case study at the end of it. Beautiful question in one of the RTPs, old RTP. Beautiful question. Although it is not targeted in the examination, but in old RTP, way back, it was there. Don't remember now the year. Employer and employees. So I have not covered up that question in my question bank, which I have given it to you, but I'll just discuss this particular point with all of you. So employer and employee would be considered. They are the related person. At least 25% of the voting power. This is confusing when you talk about associate enterprise. In associate enterprise definition of 92A, 26% of voting power is required. And here 25%. Anyways, one controls the other. This is the example would be holding and subsidiary company. Example could be holding a subsidiary company. The next particular part would be, students, over here. Both are controlled by third person. Both are controlled by whom? By third person. The next part is that together they control third person. Together they control third person. Members of same family. Now see the ICI. Here the ICI magic comes. Members of the same family. Members of the same family. Somebody will say, sir, what is family in this context? What is family, students, in this context? So if we talk about the term family, students, in this regard, this is how the ICI has asked the question, students. Spouse and children of the person, and the second one is the real game. Parents, grandparents, brother, sister, brother and sister, if they are, now this is important. Now this was not there in the first, for spouse children, this point was not there. If they are wholly or mainly dependent on such person. Now ICI question which was there, they have said that the, I think for brother, the supply was made, but that brother was not, and that was without a consideration. Now see what is the ICI question? ICI question was that he has made a supply to his brother without consideration. However, that brother that brother was independent. That brother, students, was independent. So now you tell me, in this context, this is without consideration? Yes, without consideration. So 71A is not applicable, you'll go to 71C. So it is not a supply of 71A. For determining the supply, you'll have to come to 71C. And in 71C, you hit the related party. But are they related party? Answer is no. And because they are not a related party, therefore, it is not a supply under 71C. It is not a supply under 71C. Hence, it is outside the scope of chargeability. Outside the scope of chargeability. Is that point clear to all of you, students? This is how you have to put across your answers. Fine, students? All of you? Now, tell me one thing. Let me ask you this question. Now that RTP question, students, RTP question. RTP question. Now, students, the question that was there, employer and employee, students, which you all are aware. The employer and employee, you all are aware, students, isn't it? Now, so far as the employer and employee is concerned, if the employer gives the gift to the employee, give the gifts to the employee, then up to the value of rupees 50,000 or in excess of rupees 50,000. I'm just wanted to put across this one. I just need one more particular this thing, and then I'll do a conclusion. Then I'll do a conclusion. Employer and employee. Employer is giving the gift to the employee. Employer is giving the gift to the employee. The value of the gift is up to rupees 50,000, and in second case, the value is more than rupees 50,000. Now, my question, therefore, to all of you is this. Only this much information has been given to you in the question. Only this much. Nothing else has been given to you. Nothing else, students, has been given to you. Then what are you going to say about it? What are you going to say about it? Then up to rupees 50,000 is not a supply. In excess of rupees 50,000, it is a supply. Okay, that much every one of you are aware of it. Here, employer has taken ITC. That's good. Employer has taken the ITC. Employer has taken the ITC, students on such goods. Any case in excess of 50,000, it is always a supply, so we don't have to worry about it. In excess of 50,000, it is always a supply. We don't have to worry about it. If it is up to 50,000, but the Employer has taken the ITC on that. Can we therefore say that goods is a business asset? Obviously, when I have taken that goods and now that goods is supposed to be gifted to the employee. So for the employer, it is a business asset on which he has taken the ITC. On which he has taken the ITC. And if he has taken the ITC, students, if he has taken the ITC, then the situation will jump to first case. Then automatically where it will go, where this particular point will go, it will go in the case of a permanent transfer of the business asset on which ITC was availed. And therefore, in that case, it will become a case of a supply. It will be a case of a supply in that regard. And that exactly is the point, students. That exactly is the point. So this also, students, will be a case of a supply in this regard. This is what is the conclusion that we are doing it over here. First situation. Which situation? First situation. I hope that all of you are clear with this one. Every one of you. So this is what it is to be considered over here. First situation, when ITC is taken. So even though it is up to 50,000, doesn't matter. So please read the question very carefully. If they don't tell you anything about the ITC part, they don't tell you anything about the ITC part, then in that case, whether it is supply or not, I hope that all of you know what is the conclusion to be given over. Is that point clear to all of you? Every one of you? In this context, one last button be given to you. If you all have copied, students, last point I just forgot. In fact, it is also there in your question. Beautiful question. Beautiful question. That is one of the best question and the toughest question. So I am addressing the question items over here, the difficult question items. If I have to tell you. So what I'm doing is that I'm using their adjustment, the difficult adjustment, and I'm putting an effort to explain it to you over here with the while I'm discussing the provision with you. So one of the beautiful adjustment, students. First, you just put across in the case of distinct person one note, students. One note needs to be written for a distinct person. And this is an important note for which they have asked this question. On distinct person, one note, students. And students, one more thing which I'll just request to all of you because it's still an initial class. The notebook, students, that you are maintaining, please ensure in that notebook which you are maintaining, you are doing a serial numbering of your notebook. Please do serial numbering of your notebook. Okay? Do the serial numbering of your notebook without fail. So this note is in that case of distinct person. So at the end of it, when you have to revise it, you can always jump to the key pages which you have already have put up as far as serial number is concerned. Right here in students one note. Interstate in capital. Please write in capital. Interstate movement of various. So whichever I am using in the capital, you also do the same thing. Various conveyance. Conveyance between distinct person for carriage of goods or passenger or for repair and maintenance. This is not a supply of goods or services. not a supplier of goods and services. Have you all copied? So students, in this particular context, question therefore is whether that conveyance, is it a supply of a conveyance? The question that they are asking is it a supply of a conveyance in this context? That conveyance is used for the movement of goods and passengers, which is there in a distinct person, the other state. I have a distinct branch. So obviously, when there is a stock transfer, what you people are saying, along with the stock, even the conveyance is moving, na? Along with the stock, even the conveyance is moving. So if along with stock, if the conveyance is also moving in this context, then what do you tell me? Tell me in that case, students, whether there is a supply of conveyance also. Yes, for the goods we will say, for the good students we are going to say what? That there is a supply, because that is between a distinct person. But then what about that conveyance itself in this context? Is it a supply? And the answer is no. This is what I try to say. Now that conveyance, purpose of that conveyance is for carriage of the goods, or the purpose of the conveyance which is moving to the other premises is for repair and maintenance purpose that it is moving in this context. Therefore, in that regard, students, in that regard, that conveyance which moves to the premise of the distinct person, in that the goods are there. In that there are materials for repair and maintenance for which the conveyance is used. So yes, as far as the goods are concerned, which is moving in that conveyance, we will say it's a deemed supply between a distinct person. But what about the conveyance getting moving from one state to another? Is that also to be considered in a similar manner? That yes, it is also deemed supply? Will you say that, students? And the answer is this is what it says. So conveyance, there is no supply at all in that context. For the conveyance, students, there is no supply at all. That is how the things has to be done. But yes, for such conveyance, students, which is moving, for such conveyance which is moving, again a delivery challan would be required. Why? Because we need to know that this is the conveyance which has taken that particular goods to that distinct person premise. Therefore, that delivery challan would specify primarily that okay, this was a conveyance through which that goods has moved to that particular other particular branch in a different state, which is all considered as a distinct person. So only a delivery challan would be sufficient enough. Same thing, person of conveyance returning for the same thing. The purpose is for what? For carriage of a carriage of the goods and passengers. Or for repair and maintenance, the movement has happened. So the movement has happened because of carriage of goods, or the movement has happened because of repair and maintenance. If that is the reason of the movement, then that conveyance is not supplied to the distinct person. I hope that all of you are clear with this one. Fine, students. I'm taking a deliberate pause, students. You would have noted that. So that if many of you would be writing it, I know that many of you would also be writing it while I'm explaining a lot of things. So I'm deliberately taking a pause in these contexts so that you are in a position to write down anything that you want to write it down. So obviously I cannot give these notes, these kind of this thing, but I'm capturing each and every point along with the reasons. Question from the last question, which again is an adjustment from that beautiful question of the ICI. One of the difficult question of the ICI, which we will get ourselves exposed to, which I am using the adjustment over here itself. That question, that adjustment is, what about supply of goods to client location without any consideration? What about for them? What about for this one? In this case, will it fall under 7(1)(a)? Tell me one thing. First is 7(1)(a). Is 7(1)(a) applicable? Answer is no. No consideration. 7(1) is out. Can 7(1)(b) be made applicable? Is it a related person? If the client is a related person, then a different story. But obviously, it is not a related person. Is it a distinct person? If it is not a related person, again the answer is no. So neither related nor a distinct person, students, in this context. So therefore, in this regard, students, this is what it is. Now, what has to be done? Whether tax invoice will this be raised? Answer is no. Delivery challan, will that be raised? No supply. You will say, sir, but why somebody will do this? That's a good question. This could be done, students. Say, for example, in the client location, I am supposed to manufacture a plant. At the client location, I am supposed to manufacture the plant. You may be aware, no? Turnkey projects happens in those cases. So many of the goods get supplied to that client location. Those goods independently are not charged for any invoice, because the price which I'm going to charge finally to him would be that of the machinery, not towards these independent parts which I'm supplying it to the client location. So therefore, these supply is taking place without what? Without any consideration at first place of these particular parts. And therefore, 7(1)(a) not getting applicable, 7(1)(c) again not getting applicable for these parts which has moved to the client location. because that is not which has been supplied. That context. I am not going to get consideration for that particular part. I cannot generate an invoice for that particular part that I am giving you nut bolts. This is this thing. He said about nut bolts. What is the motor? I am giving you motor. I am giving you steel, iron, plates. No tax invoice. Primary. Because the contract is not for these items, the contract is for the machinery. That is how the thing will be considered it. So those particular supply which has happened, that is without any consideration. That Tulsi, that approval part, valuation topic caters to this kind of a query. That I'll not touch upon right now because that's a very specific question that you are targeting on the valuation. Will distract it. Okay. So therefore, students, we will now put across. This is all that has happened. We are done with this particular part completely, students. See the kind of analysis that has gone in this regard. Now coming to our fourth particular part, this is about import of service. Didn't I told you about this one, import of service? So 7.1c is also having import of service, read with schedule number 1. And what about 7.1b? What about 7.1b? Did 7.1b also is having import of service? And the answer is yes. So 7.1b is also having import of service. 7.1c is also having the same. So therefore, students, what we are going to do is that combine. We need to combine the two. Otherwise, it becomes very confusing towards the end. I'm telling you, students. And you would have also realized in past how confusing that they are as the things keep proceeding further. So therefore, in that regard, students, all of you, 7.1b, first one which was 7.1b. So 7b, how I am going to distinguish? 7.1b import of service was for consideration. Was for what? Was for consideration in this case. Now, was business important in 7.1b? Answer is no. So whether or not for business, whether or not in the course of business, in the course of business. And 7, whose course of business, students? Here, in whose course of business? Supplier or importers? In whose course of business now we are supposed to see? In 7.1a, we have seen that the supplier has supplied the goods or services in the course of his business for a consideration. But when it comes to import of goods or services, in whose course of business we are going to see? Students, here we will have to see from the point of view of the importer. That's the reason why they have used the word import. So whether I am importing the goods, whether I am importing the services in the course of my business or not, that is what has to be seen. So this in the course of business has to be seen from the point of view of the importer. And then student 7.1c, which has been there in this context. Again, import of service without consideration. Now we all know this is without consideration. And what about this 7.1c? Is it, students, in the course of, this is without consideration. Okay, in this context. What about in the course of business? Yes, this is there. In the course of business. In the course of business, students, this is there. Again, importer's point of view. Because we have said business entity, importer point of view. So this is a case of a business entity. Now this is read with schedule 1. Why, students? Have you all copied on this? So this two has to go together, students. This two needs to go together. Now, if that is the case, students, let me then take it forward. So say, for example, this is USA, and then the recipient is in India. Now, I'm talking about, students, 71B. 71B. So 71B, import of service, which is for consideration. That is what it is when you talk about 71B. So therefore, in that case, 71B is applicable. Now the recipient that we are talking about it will get split into two. Business entity in the context or non-business entity. Now, in both the case, we don't care, na? Business entity, because 71B doesn't focus on. It says that whether or not in the course of business, 71B is okay with both the things. But we are distinguishing, if it is a business entity, then what? In the course of business. And if it is not a business entity, then what? So not in the course. Is that clear to all of you? Now, if that is the case, IGST, students, tell me one thing. IGST, will it be applicable? Yes, IGST, RCM, no? You all are aware, RCM, this is a case of interstate. And because it is a case of an interstate, we have already distinguished this particular part in our first class itself. So it's an interstate supply, and hence it will call for an IGST. So therefore, it is an IGST that will be made applicable in both the cases. And accordingly, RCM, will it be applicable? Yes, RCM will be applicable in this context. And what about over here? RCM, will it be applicable? Yes, RCM will be applicable, but hold on over here. In this context, what is the point? See that? In this context, exemption, students. In this context, exemption is given. Exemption provided. Why they have provided exemption, students? Why they have provided exemption? Otherwise, you and me would have been murdered in this scenario. When we import any services, say I take a software services, I download some software and all. And then in that case, they say from a foreign entity. Say the place of supply is in India. Then it is an import of service. And if it is an import of service, then in that situation, IGST becomes applicable. And I am a non-business entity, although I am a business entity, but consider a different angle. I am a non-business entity. Just imagine now what will happen. 71B getting applicable? Yes, it is applicable. Is it a supply? Yes, it is a supply. So what happens now? I am in the charge. Yes, I am in the charge. GST becomes applicable. But exemption is given to me because they understand that I am what? I am a household entity. That level of sensitivity has been maintained by the government, that otherwise every importer who is non-business entity, they will have to undertake this sort of a compliance, which they will not do it. And therefore, exemption is provided. But there is one exception over here. That one exception is given to this context. So for this one, students, over here, there is one exception to this category. What is an exception? We'll see. But before that, I'll just come to this one. Take the import of service. Import of service is done by whom? Students, import of service is done by whom? So the import of service is done by a business entity. In the course of business. Yes, in the course of business. Yes, Prasanna. In the course of business? And the answer is yes, in the course of business. Whether RCM is applicable? Yes, which means that the business entity in India which is importing the service will be liable to pay the GST. RCM is applicable. Now, if students, if the business entity is unregistered, if the business entity is unregistered, say its turnover is not more than 20 lakhs, so that business entity is unregistered. Then if it is unregistered, then whether the registration will it become compulsory in this case? Whether the registration, students, will it become compulsory in this case, in this regard? Then you will say, students, then the registration is mandatory, isn't it? Registration is mandatory, and that registration mandatory is not on the basis of turnover, is not on the basis of turnover, is mandatory under section 24. So that will go under 24. So in 24, there are some situations which has been highlighted wherein, irrespective of the turnover, the registration is mandatory. And one of the situation identified in section 24 is where the liability to pay is as per the reverse charge. Where the liability to pay is as per the reverse charge. So accordingly, they will have to, in this context, if they will have to register themselves in this regard. Now coming back to this particular part, one exception now. Now this one exception, students, is in respect of the OIDR service. OIDR service. What is OIDR? Online information database access and retrieval service. Okay. Now, as you know, all these Netflix and all. Now, service provider is a person in a non-taxable territory. Person in a non-taxable territory. And who is the service recipient? Now, that is the individual. And these individual like me, I am a non-business entity. People are watching Netflix and all. So, in that particular case, now they understand, they make this, now this falls under this category. Import of service, students, import of service, and to a non-business entity, they understood this case that this is a huge value, and if they let go this, they give the exemption, that will be huge. And that is the reason why, students, what they have said in this regard for online information data access and all, that herein the exemption not applicable. Exemption, students, is not applicable. And not only that, they also understand these individual, will they be paying the GST if exemption is not available? Whether you think that, who will pay, Netflix will pay or this individual will pay? Obviously Netflix should be made liable to be paid. So therefore this would be as per the forward charge. So forward charge, no RCM. This is the distinction. Forward charge, no RCM in this case. I hope that all of you are clear with this one. Now, if that is the case, students, with 7.1b over, now we come to 7.1c. In 7.1c, then what is that? Import of service. In 7.1c, students, then what is the import of service? So 7.1c, if you talk about it, that is again USA. Recipient is in India. Now, accordingly, it is import of service. 7.1c is all about what? Import of service, and that is without consideration, students. Without consideration. Now, if in this context, recipient, again take the two things. If it is a business entity, which is in the course of business, in the course of business, and what about the second one, students? Not a business entity. Not a business entity. So in this case, it will be not in the course of business. And I told you already, students, 7.1c demanded that no consideration, but it should be in the course of business. And if it is not in the course of business, it is not a supply. No supply under 7.1c. No supply under 7(1)(c). All of you agree to this one? No supply under 7(1)(c). Now, if it is a business entity, students, if it is a business entity, then in that case, again, two things. Be careful, students. Import from related person or import from own establishment outside India. Outside India would mean, students, state, different state. I told you in the interstate supply. What I told you in the interstate supply, that the other outside the state, that outside the state can be another state or it could be another country. That is referred as a other state. Other countries also referred as other state. So import, students, import from this one, students. That is what is the scope. So 7(1)(c) is applicable over here. And accordingly, it is a supply. Accordingly, students, it is a supply. And accordingly, IGST, will it be applicable? Yes, IGST will be applicable. RCM is what will be considered over here. RCM is what will be considered over here. If it is other person, then? If it is other person, then? Other person means other than the related party, other than the own establishment outside India, then students, it is a case of a, because 7(1)(c) is limited only in respect of no consideration and import from no consideration. 7(1)(c) is limited only for no consideration. And who has done the import? Business entity has done the import. From whom they are doing the import? From whom they are doing the import? From the related person or from its own establishment outside India. Only then 7(1)(c) is applicable. Otherwise, 7(1)(c) is not applicable at all. Otherwise, 7(1)(c) is not applicable at all. Is that point clear to all of you? Every one of you? This comparison therefore becomes such a critical aspect in this entire discussion of GST. I hope that all of you are clear with this one now. Every one of you. No doubts whatsoever so far as the discussion is concerned. Fine, students. So, students, this is where primarily the things are. Now, I will require one last lecture, which we will conclude in the next session, and we will be done with supply, and then I can move into the practicals. We'll do with these practicals because this is a tricky chapter. The other topics, like ITC is one where the pause needs to be done. That's also a very tricky topic. And then exemptions and all. Other topics will move very fast. But this is where such a tricky topic. Because we know the answer, but we cannot write the answer. This is what I can define this topic as. Supply topic, students, you will also accept and admit that we know the answer, but we cannot write the answer, is what this topic is all about. Do you all agree to this one? That is what this topic is all about. And that is the reason why this pause is required. Now, students, primarily, I will meet you students now directly. Students, on Monday night, which is my holiday. So, students, I'm going to Trambakeshwar, Nasik. So this month of Shravan is going on. So that is where I go normally. So I will be heading to Nasik, students. So that is Monday afternoon. I'm returning back. So we will resume now on Monday night. Timing would be the same, 9:15. Okay, or maybe we'll start early also on Monday so that we can complete this topic on the theoretical part. And don't worry, I will cover it up with some holidays which is coming in future, like your 15th August or maybe some extension on Sundays or so. I'll cover it up. Don't worry on that. Okay, so just allow me that particular break because that's something which I go for this one. Monday 8:30 we'll start on 8:30 itself. Not an issue. So that we can complete this particular topic. Fine, students. So I'll see you now on Monday night. Till then, keep revising the stuff and please reading your other subjects also. That is also equally important. And for DT, I already told you the DT lecture links are there. I hope that you are making a use of those which is already put up in the DT for that in the folder and all. And again, I'm repeating, students, since 3 days off is there, my please humble suggestion to please, you yourself would be knowing the value of the lectures and all. Please spread across to all your friends across, so that everyone can take this benefit, and that is what primarily this effort would be worth it at the end of the day, so that maximum students qualify this particular time, and this would all be worth it and effort and the hard work. Fine, students, definitely you will be there in my prayer in that particular. It goes without saying, students, whenever I am in this pilgrimage trip, one particular prayer definitely is yours. So one particular part of my prayer, in this case, mostly presently, to give you that particular strength to withhold this particular, to ensure that you are in a position to deal with this particular tough time and come out and excel through it. The courage that is required to handle this tough moment is what primarily is the prayer, is what I always ask for it. At the end of it, giving, not giving, up to the Almighty, but at least the strength, the courage, face this difficult time of your life. That is what is always there for all of you. Okay, you then, students. Okay, next class on Monday night, 8:30. Also, we'll meet up. See you then. Good night to all of you. Take